I'd like to introduce Finney, who I've known for many years now through the growing Natives Garden Tour Committee on which she sits. She has a beautiful native plant garden of her own that has been on the tour many times. But she's also a master gardener who's helped create an amazing demonstration garden in Martial Cottle Park. How many of you have actually been to Martial Cottle Park? Okay, excellent. So you might know that at the southern end, there's a master gardener's area. And it has a very nice shade structure. It has lath houses for growing plants, but it has a beautiful demonstration garden, which is, I think, 70%, 80% native plants. And if you see it in the summer or spring, it's just stunning. And Anne is responsible for that. So without further ado, Anne Finney.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Arvind. Can you guys hear me in the back?
Yes.
Okay, great. Martial Cottle Park I would invite you out there. The native team meets on Tuesdays and oftentimes on Friday. We have historically done a good bit of propagation. And in fact, some of my community volunteers are actually in the audience. Good to see you. Some of the plants that we propagated, I brought back 3 flats to share with you guys. They're free. So there might be a price tag on the label, but they're actually free. So who here has heard about master gardeners? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so for those of you who have not heard about master gardeners, we are volunteers. We're specially trained by the University of California to give science-based information and give advice on pretty much all things horticultural. And one of the biggest parts of our mission is to teach about sustainability, and there's nothing more sustainable in horticulture than a California native garden. So that's my focus and my specialty. I love the topic, and in that topic, this is my favorite topic, is how to propagate. So thank you very much for having me. I got my start in, I think, about maybe 2017, sitting in the audience just like you. I had just moved down from Seattle, and all I knew about California natives and gardening in California was that it had to be very different than how I was gardening in Seattle. So I learned so much from Arvind, from the California Native Plant Society's local chapter. They have a wonderful website if you haven't seen it, and from the master gardeners. We've had 19 weeks of training that just touches the tip of the iceberg. And the thing that we are really taught is how to search appropriately for the science-based information. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Today's talk is about best practices on growing native plants from seed and cuttings. Now, you got a whole bunch of seeds and cuttings. What do you do with them? How do you maximize your success? So we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to demonstrate for you how to do some plantings and how I think when I plant a seed, and also how to do some cuttings and how I think about doing a cutting. So hopefully you'll get a few pearls. This is not rocket science. It's actually, it's fun. It's easy, it's fun. I think you'll really enjoy it. So what you'll learn today will maximize your success rate, your efficiency, and your resources and time. So the biggest tip that I can give you is do a little bit of reading about the plant that you've got. Do a little bit of research on that seed. What conditions does it like to grow in? And that will really help you. So under what conditions would that seed germinate? Does it need light? Does it need dark? Does it need heat? Certain plants, unless they have light, won't germinate. That might be something like tidy tips or some of the buckwheats or gilia, they want to have light. So I'll demonstrate it to you, how to plant so that you are giving some light. Some plants, the seeds need pre-treatment. They might need to be soaked overnight because they have a hard coat. Lupin is one famous example of that, where you're soaking that seed. I would soak overnight. I stick it in some hot water and just let it go through the night, and I'll plant it the next day. Some plants need scarification. That means you're taking it and you might be nicking that hard shell. So on the lupin, it also would benefit from scarification. You could nick it even with a pair of nail clippers or a sharp knife. So smoke treatment. A lot of California natives grow after a wildfire has come through. And that wildfire and the smoke from that stimulates germination. You can mimic that with just the smoke in the barbecue section, that liquid smoke. You can soak the seeds in that, expose the seed to that. So those are some of the things that you might want to learn, just to make sure that your germination success is higher. Research those specific species requirements. And in that research, you might find some useful things online. When I was doing the research for this talk, I typically end my search query with site:/ucanr.edu. That brings me to all the University of California Master Gardener publications, PDFs from the university, the experts have, that will narrow down your search. You can do a .edu search, which will include other states. Washington State, for example, has a fantastic one, but we like to do our local knowledge because we're very specific. As you know, our climate is unlike the rest of the country. So site:/ucanr.edu will bring up a whole bunch of information. So when I entered in propagating California native plants by cuttings, what did it show me? A fantastic chart written by a master gardener in San Mateo and San Francisco County with a whole bunch of popular plants to propagate, the time of year to best take cuttings or to plant, and the sources from which she got this information. She collated a whole bunch of different sources. So this one's called California Native Plant Propagation Calendar for San Mateo and San Francisco counties. And you want to just tweak this a little bit because we do get hotter down here. So just keep that in mind. This was posted this month by Master Gardener Catherine Callis, outstanding resource, okay? She also has a propagation PDF for cuttings with softwood cuttings, and softwood cuttings are what most people do. There's several types of cuttings you would make: softwood, hardwood, semi-soft in between. So most of them though are softwood cuttings, and her PDF is excellent, step by step, so that you don't have to write everything down that I tell you. She you can scan these QR codes, and so we'll pass this around so that you guys can scan that and have these at your own house.
Could you say that slower and louder, please? The site:/.
Site. So put in your search engine, whatever your question is, and then write site:/ucanr.edu. Why don't I just pass that around as well? I hesitated a little bit. I just got to say this because we're in Silicon Valley. I hesitated a little bit to write. There is a search engine that I used, a new search engine. Some ex-Google employees got together and put together a fantastic engine called allofus.ai. It's on that sheet as well. And I asked it to write a PowerPoint on how to propagate native plants from cuttings. Give me 15 pages. It was outstanding. I might be redundant soon. I would have changed one word in that whole PowerPoint. But what it does is it looks at information from the experts, from recognized experts in the field. And so the sources that it was pulling from was CNPS, Theodore Payne, Los Politis, and other experts. So I liked it. I was a little surprised. And as you know, hallucinations can occur in this, so be careful and always verify your work. So basically, we've discussed some sources. If you haven't seen Dara Emery's book on propagating native plants from seeds, that's great. This one by Helen Popper is fantastic. A lot of information on what to propagate when, and terrific maintenance on a month-to-month basis. So those are things that I think about. The other thing that's really important is cleanliness. You want to make sure that you have good sanitation when you're working with propagation, whether it be by seeds or by cuttings, especially by cuttings. So what does that mean? You're working with new soil. You might be working with a potting soil out of a new bag, not what you used in the pot with the plant that died a year ago. Don't dig it out of your garden. Those soils may harbor disease. They may harbor insects, eggs, fungus. So you might be more prone to having problems if you don't use new soil. And just use a good quality potting soil when you're doing seeds. Some of them have mycorrhizals even added in along with it, but you don't have to spend a lot of money. Just use a decent potting soil. And clean tools, such as your clippers, for instance. What I would do before I make any cuts, I would clean, I would sharpen, and sanitize this. And you can do it with just alcohol, rubbing alcohol. You could do it with like a disinfectant spray. Or my favorite is a 10% bleach solution, which is 1 part bleach and 9 parts water. That 10% bleach solution and all of these other disinfectants, you let sit on your tools for about 5 minutes or so to kill off any bacteria and disease. Because bleach is caustic, you then rinse your tool and then oil it, and you are good to go. Do not reuse pots. Use new pots, or because I'm extremely frugal and cheap, I like to wash my old pots and sanitize them. I'll put them in a bucket with 10% bleach solution, let them sit there and then rinse them. So you can do that. But so sanitation, hugely important. And let's go now to looking at how to grow things with seeds. Time of year can be really important. If you're doing it when it's hot, it's in the summer, your success rate may be a little bit less. The seeds may have to struggle a little bit more, or you may have to watch more carefully the water, the wind. You may have to pay more attention. You can grow any seed pretty much at any time of year if you provide the right conditions. So putting in a pot, we've actually started in July, but in our shade houses there at Martial Cottle, we're out watering every 3 days. And we have a few tips that help extend, help extend the time that the pots can go without getting water. So certain plants, if the conditions demand it, may need watering every day. So time of year should be considered. Natives have deep roots. So even though you have a flat that if you got hundreds of plants that you want, you can start them in a shallow flat like this. You'll need to work to up pot them. I like using 4-inch pots and up. So 4-inch pots or these pots here are good sizes because they have a lot of room for a deep root formation, a tap root, such as a lupin, for instance. They have tap roots, and poppies. If you've ever tried to transplant one, they resent their roots being disturbed and may die. So I like to start them in something that's a little bit deeper if possible. And so use good seeds. Use seeds that are newer if you can, collected within the last couple of years. If they were wild pollinated, you might get a little bit lower germination rate because maybe not every seed in that flower head got pollinated. So expect that, plant more than you actually want. So you're planning for loss as well. So yeah, I'll get back to that. So use good seeds, store them properly. If you're not going to plant these very soon, make sure you keep them in the seed envelopes in a cool, dry place at home, dark, protected from heat and light. Or you can, so a closet at home would be great. You can put them though in the refrigerator. And the refrigerator in your house has higher humidity, so close the, put it in a closed container. Seeds need to breathe, so you'll want to, once weekly or so, open up that container and allow some fresh air to come in. So those are both acceptable methods. And older seeds may be less viable. So if you have something that's 10 years old, sow a little bit more than you actually want. Mother Nature is amazing. She can go 10 years with a drought and then have a super bloom the year it goes, the year it rains. So those seeds may not be bad, but just allow for extra planting. How do you decide when to plant it in the ground versus in a pot? Well, we've already talked about the particular requirements. Maybe something with a taproot might be better, put it in the ground. Wildflowers, the ambassadors are giving out wildflowers. There's quite a few wildflower seeds back there. There's a fantastic way of doing that directly in the ground, but you have to be in advance of when you want to plant. You have to start maybe about 6 weeks. What you do is the area where you want to put your wildflower seeds, weed it first, then water very well, and wait 2 weeks. The weeds that come up, pull them, water again, wait another 2 weeks. Do that 3 times, and that basically depletes the weed bank that's in your yard, in that spot. So deplete out the weed bank, because it's sometimes really difficult to tell what is a weed and what's your new plant. So when you weed after you've seeded, you might be pulling out some of your new plants too. So that's a good habit that you can try that. Sowing in pots, super controlled. You know the conditions, you're working with new soil, you're not gonna have to compete with weeds. And if you have critters, if you have slugs, if you have birds or lots of rabbit activity, you can still, protect pots very easily. You can still put them in your garden. I have put plants in and use strawberry to protect, overturned strawberry baskets to protect from the birds. The dollar stores, fantastic. These wire waste paper baskets. So what young plants, you just put this over the young plant. At Martial Cottle Park, there's probably about 50 there now in the garden. And then you take a landscape staple and put 3 of these around, and it will protect the area that you just seeded, and it'll protect young seedlings so that they can get established and withstand a little bit of predation. We have lots of rabbits and critters. Yes, you have a question?
So if I'm putting it in the ground and if I have mulch, is it a good idea to take the mulch away? Because I put poppy seeds and I had mulch and it didn't really take.
So the question is, if you're putting wildflower seeds in the ground and there's mulch, do you need to pull away the mulch? Well, I'll tell you something. Poppy seeds, which is what you just said, will come up through mulch, pretty thick mulch too even. So the answer to your question is, it depends, maybe. Light mulch, most of the wildflower seeds can come up, a lot of plants can come up through light mulch, and it's not a problem. But if it's 4 or 6 inches, you might increase your chances of, because seeds need good contact with the growing medium. They need good soil contact in order to germinate, because they have to kind of remain moist, and that mulch might be enough to give them a little bit of moisture through the germination period. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yes.
have a quick question about the soil. Can you if you use your own garden soil with compost and so on, can you simply sterilize it in an oven?
The question is, if you use your own garden soil that you've dug out of your garden, can you sterilize that in the oven? And the answer is yes. You can bake it. I would recommend doing that in the barbecue, because I have tried this in my house and it is odoriferous. So do it in your barbecue. You can bring it up, and I want to say it's like I'm not sure if it was 160, 180 degrees for a certain period of time. I'd have to look that up. You can easily look it up. But yes, you have to bring it up to temperature, and some places will steam their soil. So long as it gets up to that temperature for a prolonged period, you're fine. So, yeah, the idea is just to eliminate the pathogens. Yes.
But if you do that, then you're not just killing the bad stuff, you're killing the good stuff.
You are also, if you bake your soil, killing any mycorrhizals that might be there, any good bacteria that might exist as well. So yes, that is one thing. So I'd like to go ahead and use what's already been there, from the potting soil bag, but yes, you can do that.
But the potting soil bag doesn't have the good bacteria in it.
Some of them have it added.
Does it? Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah, they have, this actually, what's here has mycorrhizals added to it.
Okay.
Yeah, so just look at the individual bag. So, how deep do you plant the seed? Anybody know how deep you plant that seed? Generally speaking, twice the diameter of that seed. So if you have a seed with the widest diameter, like this much, you would want to plant that seed about twice as deep. That's a general good rule of thumb. That doesn't apply to everything. That applies to most things though. So that's where reading up and knowing a little bit about your particular seed would be nice. We talked a little bit about planning for loss. Once you get things in the ground, you might have some predation. You may not get as much germination as you wanted. So plant more than you actually want, and then share it with your friends. You'll be really popular. Always, always, always label. Make sure that you put on your label the variety, the species of plant that you have, the date. And I like to also put any special treatment that I've done, such as stratification or soaking. So once you've got things planted and you've got your seedlings up and they have their true leaves, the first leaves that come out, as you know, they're not the true leaves. They're called cotyledons and they help provide energy to the plant, but the true leaves are an indication that you might want to up pot. And if you see roots coming out of the bottom of the plant, the pot, then you might want to up pot as well. Couple things, if you seed it very thickly, how do you take them apart? Very gently, so as not to disturb the roots. So you can put it out on your counter and some soils will help break it apart, but if you've left them in there a little too long, a trick that I like to use is I'll put them in a pot of water and dunk the whole entire, take off the pot, dunk the whole entire mass in that pot and then start tickling from the bottom. And the soil will fall away and the roots will separate. So it's a really easy way if you've overseeded or if you just can't stand to chop off and behead the seedlings, because thinning is important. If you have too many, if you've got 6 in a pot and you want to keep 1 or 2 of the most vigorous, there's 2 ways of doing it, either dividing it or cutting out the others. So I have such a hard time thinning. So I end up doing the dividing and giving it to my friends. So even consistent moisture, critical for germination. How do you do that? Well, after you've put your seeds in your pots, you can do this very carefully. You don't want to have the plant sitting in water continuously because roots need air to grow. But you can line a flat, for instance, or a tray. You can use a tray that holds the water in and just leave a little bit of moisture down at the bottom, leave just a small amount of water down there, and that might get you through a few days. And again, you want to make sure that you're not keeping the plant, the seeds constantly overwatered. So that's a fine balance. When you have this tray filled with your seeded pots, one other thing that we do at the park when we seed is we'll take a sheet of plastic, like taking this bag, opening it up, and then fold it over and tuck it in, similar to what's done here with this row cover. I've got, pretend these are cuttings, and this helps to retain the humidity. So if you lay this down on your plant, on your tray, the seedlings will have the even moisture, and they'll start growing and then pressing up against this plastic. And at that point, you'll remove the plastic. So we use that trick. You gotta watch it. You gotta make sure we do it under 50% shade. You don't want to create such a greenhouse effect that it bakes your plant. So we do this, our shade is 50%. You can do it at your yard in part shade and just, not direct sunlight. So,
Warm weather.
I beg your pardon?
When the weather warms up, you do that, not this winter?
We will start things that way often. If it's gonna be a really hot day, 85 and up or 80 and up, I would wanna take that off. You can start in flats. A flat is terrific if you line it with some paper or cardboard. You can get a lot of seeds going in one easy go. Up-potting does take a lot of effort though, after you've started that. So I want to show you a couple of things. I want to demonstrate kind of like what I'm thinking about. So here are lupin seeds, which I started last night in hot water. And these lupin seeds are ready. They've softened. I've made a label. I've got on the label 2 different things, because one of the sources said that lupin likes light but that was just one out of what I saw. So I'm not really sure if lupin seeds best germinate in light or not. So I'm gonna try two different methods. I'm gonna put one with some vermiculite on top, and that will allow light to penetrate. So what's vermiculite? It's basically a rock. It's mica. It holds moisture. It holds some nutrients, but it lets light pass through. So in this case, what we're going to do is plant more on the surface. I'm going to rough up the top of my potting soil, just give it a little roughness. I'm going to pick out, in this case, 3 seeds, and kind of press them down just so that they're making contact. And then always work with wet vermiculite or wear a mask, because you do not want to inhale either vermiculite or perlite. So everything that I have up here, I pre-dampened, okay? It can cause damage to your lungs if you breathe this in. So I'm just gonna take a little bit and put a thin layer, maybe about 2 millimeters to, approximately a couple millimeters, that much. You can't see from the back, but that is plenty. And when you go to water this in, you do it gently. And these seeds are sitting more on the surface. And because I like to experiment, the others I would put in, and I would put in twice their depth. I've never done vermiculite with the lupin before. I have had success putting them in twice their width, and it was fine. So always put in the tag that shows what you've done, and that way you're good to go, because you will forget what's what. So that's one thing I think about. I could have also nicked it. It's a little easier to do that when you have a board. I won't show you that, but nicking that will allow the water to penetrate nicely. So those will germinate faster than if I had not done anything. The other one that I want to show you is a monkey flower. This one is bush monkey flower. And if you have some seeds, you can look at them and they look like they're huge, but that's not the seed. I'm going to pass around to you what the seed actually looks like. It's about the size of a period on your page. So these are the pods. So this pod contains dozens and dozens of seeds. So what do you do with something like this? They're so small. Again, this might benefit from having a little bit of light. So, and because they're so small, what I'm going to do again is I'm just going to rough up the soil, making some nooks and crannies, and then I'm going to squeeze that seed and roll it in my hands, turning the pod upside down so that the seeds, I'm encouraging them mechanically to fall out. So I'm just, you can't even see them really, but I'm basically crushing that. And if the some chaff gets into that, no big deal. It's okay. And then they'll put in a little bit more vermiculite, because this is one of those ones that might benefit from having light. And I'll press that down. When you go to water these, because using a strong spray can cause the seeds to kind of move to the edges, use a gentle spray. And I like to make my own container because I'm too cheap to buy a watering can. This particular one has been well used for the last few years, and I took it out today it used to hold popcorn. I poked holes in the lid, and it's a wonderful, gentle spray that pours out of here. Do not leave your container in the sun because it will come apart very easily with UV degradation, like you see here. So it might tolerate being in the sun for a short time, but I left it out too long. So that is a terrific way to gently water your plants. And one thing I did want to mention, I should have mentioned this first, work with potting soil that is moist. Potting soil can be hydrophobic when you first bring it home. Hydrophobic soil sheds the water. So much of the potting soil, when you bring it back, is hydrophobic, so that when you are watering your plants, it's actually not getting into the soil, it's going down the sides of the pot. So this is what the dry soil looks like. And it's really light and fluffy and gets into the air easily. So I take my bag, when I bring it home from the store, I open it up and run my hose in it to dampen it. So that's especially important with soils that are higher with either peat or coir, and you know, those become very hydrophobic. I bought plants from nurseries with a too high mix of peat moss, and they'll even get hydrophobic in the garden. If you are planting new plants that have a lot of peat in the mix, make sure you're on top of the watering, because that the plant will easily die once that gets dry. So keep that in mind.
And question, what happens when you do that in gardens? You throw that soil into your garden, behind the garden?
So the question was asked, what happens if you use that pot and it got hydrophobic when you planted it? Take your hose and just drip, drip, drip slowly over time. You might do that like, there's several ways you can do it, but you can do it for like an hour on that pot and then return to it the next day or a couple days later, and do that for a series of a couple, 3 days, and that should return the ability of that soil to absorb that water instead of just shedding it. So the other thing I wanted to show you is if you're doing a grass, you think about that totally differently. In a 4-inch pot, you might put 3 or 4 seeds, you thin them down to 1 or 2. But if you do a grass, you're planting hundreds of seeds, so that this 4-inch pot will become a clump, a mass. And I'll demonstrate what that might look like. I can open it. Okay,
Here.
need help. There's just no way I'm getting that. So when you go to the nursery and you buy, say, a deer grass, each individual little section, little blade, that's like one little plant almost, right? So you don't plant 5 or 6 seeds. You take a big clump of it and you spread it all around. I'm talking about like a teaspoon or tablespoonful even, and get, I don't know if you can see this. I put at least a teaspoonful in here, and you see how that surface is completely covered, right? Then you put in your additional potting soil and water it down. That's how you plant a grass, and you will have a nice bunch afterwards. So they're a little bit different. Planting grasses, you think just a little bit differently. And I've even planted grasses in, I did my deer grass in something that looked like this. It had square corners when I first planted it in. I cut it into, I don't know, 6 or 8 different square rectangular pieces. Put them out in my garden. They're lovely round things now, so don't worry about the corners. This sunflower, same type of thing. It's kind of staticky and a little bit easy. I would sprinkle that down. You can take your tool and just push them down. I just cover it again with the same tool. Press down as you plant, because you want good seed soil contact, and then water. So that's essentially what we're thinking about when we plant. Again, do your research. So what do you think about when you're doing cuttings? You've got your cutting, and why do you even want to do a cutting? Well, sometimes it's faster than growing by seed, or sometimes you have this fabulous plant that you just want to have another one with the same characteristics, whether that be a beautiful flower or lovely foliage or a particular characteristic that you really desire. And so that's, you know, why you might select doing a cutting. What's the best time of year? The best time of year is when the plant is actively growing. If the plant is not growing, your success will be much less. You can still try it. However, the failure rate is much higher. And with cuttings, if you're getting 50%, I'd be pretty happy. But I usually get like 75% or more when doing this. Some of the tips I'll tell you about. So when the plant's actively growing, what do you put your cutting in? Well, let's back up. You got a plant that you like. When do you take your cutting? In the early morning, when the plant has the most moisture in its leaves. It's gone through a cool night. The leaves are holding the most amount of moisture. If you are able to water that plant a few days prior and then take your cutting, terrific. But early morning is great. And then don't let it sit out too long. Get it into water right away and then plant it as quickly as you can. You don't want it to dry out. What do you put it in? Well, there are several options. You could use straight up potting soil, but that's not the best option. When cuttings are putting out roots, they need something that's kind of light and airy. They want a low nutrient medium. Low nutrients. So what do? You can use even 100% perlite. Perlite is a type of stone. Again, you're working with it wet. You take the bag home, hose it down, wear your mask. You just don't want to breathe this or the vermiculite. So in this one, I have 100% perlite. I got fantastic root development doing that. But if you're keeping, especially with plants that root quickly, if you're keeping something in the medium that's as low nutrient as perlite, you might want to use a liquid fertilizer when you water your cuttings. The other thing you could do is half and half, perlite and vermiculite. That mixture does retain a little bit more moisture, and the vermiculite holds a little bit more of the nutrients for the plant. Another great option, still nice and light and airy. And the other option that I often will do is a 50-50 mix with perlite and potting soil. I've had good results with that too. University of California, the UC Davis mix is 70% perlite, 15% peat moss to hold in moisture and to give some nutrients and antibacterial effect, 15% vermiculite, And they put a little bit of oyster shell calcium in their mix as well. So that's what Davis uses. So let's think about choosing the cutting from a healthy plant, a plant that's disease-free. Make sure that there's no insects and infestations, and you'll be having to watch your cuttings over time to make sure that's still the case. Use your clean, sharp tools. Again, sanitize using new pots. Most of the time, temperatures in our climate should be 65 to 77 in that neighborhood for best results with temperate plants for cuttings. Rooting hormone. I would highly recommend using rooting hormone. I've done experiments where I've compared both, and rooting hormone will give you quicker rooting. It's faster, the roots come quicker, more even rooting up the stem. And that hormone will affect, it could be 2 to 4 inches up the stem. And you don't have to use a lot of it. Just the tip of the cutting dipped in that hormone. We already talked about planning for loss. If you have 50 or 75% success with your cuttings, you're doing great. The variety of the plant can make a difference too. Certain plants tend to more easily root. And of course, keep things in a protected environment. So let me tell you kind of what I'm thinking about when I've got a cutting like this. So I've got a piece of Ribes viburnifolium here, the Catalina currant. It is lovely. The growing tip. Anything that is facing the light, not hidden underneath, would be a better candidate for a cutting. If you get something that's been in the shade too much, it may not root as nicely for you. You may get greater failure. So the growing parts of the plant, on the outside of the plant or the top of the plant, is where you want to take your cuttings. And where the leaf attaches to the stem, that's called a node. You want 3 nodes down, roughly. 3 to 5 nodes is fine, and 2 nodes up for your cutting. What do I mean by that? So here it is, I have a plant, and if this was a plant with a really kind of a weak tip, I might just pull that tip off. But in this case, I'm doing fine, it looks fine, it's sturdy. So you might take a cutting here, and I would go about 1/4 inch below where this leaf touches the stem and make an angled cut, 45 degrees. And why do I make 45-degree cut? Because that helps me to remember with that sharp angle that that's the side that goes down. Because as you get further down the stem, some plants, you may not be able to tell what's the top and what's the bottom. And if you plant it like this, you're going nowhere. You gotta plant it like this, right? So here I have my first cutting, and you might choose your pot size differently if you had something with large spaces between the nodes. So if you had a grapevine with a large, the first node here and the second node there, you might have to choose something really tall. So I've got 3 nodes where I've removed the leaves, and on the top of your plant, I said 2 nodes up. You can do 3 if you want. If this was a large leafed plant, I would take my clippers and cut the leaf in half, because the large leaf is an opportunity for loss of moisture on that plant. So you might keep a couple of leaves on the plant, and the reason why that's important is because the leaf sends down the hormone to the tip of the stem saying, make roots. You can help that along using either a liquid or a powder rooting compound. So you can get this at pretty much any store. Some of them have built-in fungicide in them, which may be desirable. And again, this is biologically active, so you don't want to breathe it. You can wear your mask. You can also make sure you're not working in the wind where this will blow up into your face. So maintain good sanitation by taking some from the stock bottle and putting it inside another bottle. So you don't need a whole lot on this stem. This amount that I have in here now will actually treat quite a few plants. You really can go really extensively into the sanitation and cleanliness, but for home purposes, what I'm doing and demonstrating to you is fine. We're not doing some rare plant where there's only 10 specimens in the whole wide world. So I'm not going to use completely sterile conditions. But when you're working with a powder rooting hormone, you want that to stick on the plant. So take your cutting, dip it in some water to get it wet, and then you're dipping it into the rooting powder. Now, that will help it stick. Less is more, is what I've been told. Less is more, meaning all you need is a little bit on the very bottom. You don't have to go all the way up the stem with that rooting powder. And so now what do? You make sure you're using your clean tools. Make sure that you're using a tool such as a pencil, or in this case, I am using chopsticks that I got from the takeout restaurant. And they are fantastic because they will help make a hole that's appropriate in size. So I can take this guy, put him down without knocking off the rooting powder. So this pot may fit multiple cuttings. I'm carefully inserting. I'm using the tool to push the medium up against the stem to hold it in place. So I've done one, and I'm going to do a second one. I'm going to keep a couple leaves, and I might maybe, let's just say, cut it here at the angle. The top, I'm going to do a flat cut. A flat cut, not a pointy cut. A pointy cut helps me remember it's the bottom. I'm going to take the bottom 3 or 4 leaves off. We'll dip it in our rooting hormone. And again, make a hole with as deep as you want this to go down. You get the idea. So you can do that with all of your plants. And after you have filled this up, make sure that you maintain consistent humidity, because these will be losing water. You're going to be, first of all, watering this down, but we use trays that hold some water, and we keep a little bit of water in the tray to have a high humidity environment, or we'll put a plastic cover that we will open up every so often to allow the plants to breathe, or use row cover. And what I've done here is just as a demonstration. I like to reuse things. I put row cover on this, but it's held off up above the plants. I robbed the stakes for my plant labels. They're terrific to hold off your cover. You can use dollar store skewers, putting them in each corner. You can use something like what you got your tomatoes in to cover up your cuttings. So something that just kind of holds the humidity in. I actually also, you can use Ziploc bags. I reuse my Ziploc bags. So once my Ziploc bags are not usable in the kitchen anymore for my food, I'll not throw that bag out, I actually reuse it and cover my plants. So in this case, the Ziploc bag has a little bit of air that can get into it. It's not fully closed. You can close it more tightly. But you don't want the plastic touching the leaves. So I've put a overturned strawberry basket in to hold the leaves in, because I put like 5 or 6 cuttings in this. And I'm holding each corner down with a chopstick. So this is a fantastic way. UC taught us this when we were doing our training with master gardeners, and it seems to work pretty well. Keep it in the shade. You want to make sure you keep these in a protected area, not exposed to light, direct sunlight, not exposed to windy conditions. Keep them in the shade for up to typically 2 to 5 weeks, a couple months is common. You're doing it until you see new growth on the plants or roots coming out. And then you can use that trick of dividing them if you need to, by dunking them in water. This loose, airy stuff just kind of falls apart. When you take it out of the pot, it easily just falls apart. But if those roots have gotten intertwined, tickle them underwater. So the other thing I wanted to mention is you do not want to work with a plant that has flowers on it, because all the energy goes to making a seed. So you don't want that. If you have to use that, because that's your only sample, you would pick off the flowers from that section. So with this coyote brush, I would be picking off every single one of these if it was my only sample. So the same is true with this Julia Phelps ceanothus. You can still use this, but these flowers come off. And you could use that top cutting. You might use a second as well from this, stripping it, and just keeping a small section there. So I think that's all the cutting that I want to show you. I will say that there are several different types of cuts that you can make. This year's growth, typically from spring and summer, is what we call softwood cutting, and most plants can be done from that. However, some plants benefit from what we call a tip heel cutting, where you're actually stripping some of the bark off of last year's stem. So here is the stem, and I pulled it in such a way that it's got what's called a heel. So that might benefit. So this is where your research comes in. That might benefit you and cause easier rooting to occur. So tip heel is one thing you might read about, and that's what that is. And then the other thing that you might want to read, and it's usually done with hardwood plants, is something called a mallet cut, where I've taken that stem where it was attached and used part of that stem in with my cutting. So again, you would trim this down and use a specimen that was a little smaller. Any questions so far? Yes.
I just have a question, if you could educate us. Let's go back to that Catalina perfume varieties. When we go into a native plant place and we buy a gallon, how old is that? How long has that been in the ground? 6 months, 2 years? I have no idea.
You know what? That's species dependent. Some plants are really fast, and and this is one that's pretty quick actually. So you might have that, it might be 6 months old, it might be a year old. Plants that take a long time, even a year or two, they're gonna cost you a lot more. So, the costs, they're so labor intensive, that might be very difficult to propagate. So, Dendromecan parfortii, the Channel Island bush poppy, really hard to propagate. I've failed and failed and failed multiple times because it's just a finicky plant. But you get something like a coyote mint, and this will go gangbusters in no time at all, just a couple months, and you've got a nice little plant in 3 or 4 months. So you're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, I could also, so that if you don't have rooting compound, you wanna use them, you use honey as your rooting compound.
The question was asked, about using honey as a rooting compound. I have not seen any science-based information about using honey as a rooting compound, so I have no idea whether or not that works. I know this works. I would not risk it if you, have, something that you really want to propagate. Yes.
When you're propagating cuttings, would you always put them in a pot, or would you create a light mixture of perlite and soil, or perlite and vermiculite, like in a hole in the ground, and you can just put it in the ground?
You want to use a pot.
You want to?
You want to use a pot because you can control the conditions, you can you can minimize infection from bacteria. The ground is a
Sure, yeah.
pathogen-rich area. You want to be able to really control your conditions with this. And when you have a medium like this, you don't want your plant in the long term to stay like this. You want to up-pot it into your soil, into a potting soil. Resist the urge of pulling it out the plant too soon, okay? Because you're damaging the roots. You want to be really careful when you do that. And if you're in the ground already, those roots can eventually get to the soil, but what are you going to do with all that stuff that's next to the stem? So use a pot.
Okay.
Yeah.
What can you do to sanitize the place where you've taken the cutting from the host plant? Is there anything you can do that protects that open?
On the host plant, as the question was asked, what do you do to sanitize the area on the host plant where you've taken a cutting? Most plants will tolerate and heal themselves. I wasn't going to tell you this, but UC Davis will actually take bleach solution, 10% bleach solution, and sanitize even their cuttings on some specimens. Briefly let them sit on that. I suppose you could do that for your host plant too, but I would not recommend it. I would just let it ride. I have never had an issue, but time of year, remember I talked about time of year being important. I would not take cuttings from my manzanitas, for example, during the rainy season, because they're susceptible to branch dieback. You want to take a cutting, say, maybe in September, before the rains come, allow 6 weeks for it to heal. So certain plants like that, pay attention to your time of year to minimize disease. I think we've pretty much used up our time. Am I correct? I thank you for coming. I would invite you to come out to Martial Cottle Park and come play with us in the greenhouse.